I still can't believe how quickly everything changed that afternoon. One minute I was driving back from meeting with my realtor, excited about possibly buying my first apartment, and the next minute is mostly a blur. My name is Sheila, and I'd spent the last hour discussing mortgage options and looking at a promising 2-bedroom apartment that was finally within my price range. The meeting had gone well, and I was feeling optimistic about my chances of getting approved for the loan. I remember pulling out of the realtor's parking lot and heading down Marshall Street. The sun was bright, and I had to adjust my visor to see properly. That's probably why I only caught a glimpse of the other car in my peripheral vision before everything went sideways, literally. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched against metal as the other vehicle slammed into my car at high speed. I felt my car being dragged across the pavement, the world spinning around me in a sickening blur. Then came another crash, this time into something solid. I later learned it was a utility pole. After that, everything gets fragmented. I was trapped in the twisted remains of my car, the steering wheel pressed uncomfortably against my chest. There was a strange smell, burning rubber maybe? And voices, lots of voices, coming from somewhere outside. I tried to respond but couldn't tell if any sound actually came out. Through my hazy vision, I could see flashing lights, red and blue strobes, that made my growing headache even worse. The next clear memory I have is of firefighters cutting through my car. The sound of metal being torn apart was horrifying, but I was too dazed to feel properly scared. They worked quickly, talking to me the whole time, though I can't remember what they were saying. When they finally got me out, everything became a whirlwind of activity. Paramedics transferred me to a stretcher, asking me questions and shining lights in my eyes. They were moving fast, which I guess should have told me how serious it was. "You need emergency surgery," one of them told me as they loaded me into the ambulance. "Is there anyone we should contact?" "My phone," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Call my parents. They're in my contacts, Mom and Dad." The last thing I remember is being wheeled through bright hospital corridors, fluorescent lights flashing past overhead. Someone in scrubs was telling me they were about to put me under anesthesia. Then everything went black. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the emptiness. Just me, the steady beeping of monitors, and the sterile white walls of a hospital room. My throat felt like sandpaper, and there was a dull ache throughout my entire body that even the painkillers couldn't completely mask. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. Every inch of me protested, and I let out an involuntary groan. That must have alerted someone, because moments later a nurse walked in, clipboard in hand. "Good to see you're awake," she said, checking my vitals. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed to croak out. "How long was I out?" "About 12 hours. The surgery went well." She adjusted something on my foredrip. "You're lucky, it could have been much worse." I glanced around the empty room again, before asking the question that was really on my mind. Did my parents come by while I was under? They should have been contacted. The nurse's expression changed slightly, just a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. She busied herself with checking my chart before responding. "We did reach your mother," she said carefully. "We informed her about the accident and your condition, but..." She paused, seemingly choosing her words. "She said they wouldn't be able to come. Something about your sister's high school graduation." "I'm sorry, should we try calling someone else?" "No," I said, settling back against the pillows. "No, this is exactly what I expected." And it was. Some might find it shocking that parents would choose a high school graduation over visiting their critically injured daughter in the hospital, but I knew better. This was just another chapter in a story that had been playing out my entire life. You see, I was born first, a difficult delivery that nearly killed both me and my mother. The doctors told my parents afterwards that the chances of having another child were practically non-existent. For 7 years, I was an only child, though looking back, I realize I was never quite enough for them. Then came the miracle. Against all odds, my mother got pregnant again. Emma was born healthy and perfect, and from that moment on, everything changed. No, that's not quite right, everything crystallized. The pattern that had always been there just became more obvious. Emma was their miracle baby, their second chance, their perfect daughter. Every wish was granted, every whim indulged. New clothes, the latest toys, the best of everything. Meanwhile, I learned to make do with hand-me-downs and clearance rack specials. The contrast was most obvious on birthdays. I remember my 13th birthday clearly. I got a modest set of colored pencils I'd been asking for. Before I could even properly thank them, they presented Emma with an expensive new dollhouse. So she wouldn't feel left out, they said, as my 6-year-old sister smirked at me over her much larger present. That became the pattern. Every celebration of mine had to include something for Emma, and her gift was always better. If they didn't, she'd throw epic tantrums, crying about how unfair it was that I got presents when she didn't. Rather than teach her about taking joy in others' happiness, my parents solved the problem by making sure she always got the better end of any deal. By the time I reached high school, I'd learned 2 important lessons. I couldn't count on my parents for anything, and the only way out was through my own hard work. My parents made that clear enough without ever actually saying it. The money was being saved for Emma's future. So I threw myself into everything I could. While other kids were hanging out at the mall or going to parties, I was staying late after school, building my resume. I studied like my future depended on it, because it did. Advanced placement classes, honor roll, academic competitions, you name it, I was there. "Sheila, would you be interested in starting a school newspaper?" Mrs. Rodriguez, my English teacher, asked me one day after class. "We need someone organized and dedicated to run it." I didn't just start the newspaper, I turned it into something the school had never seen before. We covered real issues, not just pep rallies and lunch menus. When the principal saw what we were doing, he approached me with another idea, a school TV station. We started broadcasting morning announcements, covering school events, even doing investigative pieces about local issues affecting students. Teachers couldn't stop singing my praises. The principal even wrote me a glowing college recommendation letter, calling me one of the most exceptional students in our school's history. But at home? Nothing changed. My parents barely noticed my achievements, too busy cooing over Emma's participation trophy from her soccer tournament or her B in math. The only person who seemed to notice my success was Emma herself, and not in a good way. "God, it's so annoying," I overheard her complaining to Mom one day. "Everyone at school keeps calling me Sheila's sister. Like I'm not even my own person. It's not fair." Instead of explaining to Emma that she could make her own name for herself through hard work, Mom just hugged her and said, "Don't worry, sweetie. You're special in your own way." All that work paid off though. When college acceptance letters started arriving, I had options, actual, real options. But the best one was from State University, 2 states over. Full scholarship, including room and board. When I told my parents, they barely looked up from helping Emma with her middle school science project. I left for college that fall, with Emma just starting 6th grade. The distance felt good, necessary, even. I got a part-time job at the campus coffee shop to cover my personal expenses, threw myself into my studies, and started building a life that had nothing to do with being the less favored daughter. My parents would call occasionally, but the conversations were always the same. Emma made the junior high cheerleading squad, where Emma got the lead in the school play. Never, "How are your classes going?" or "Are you eating enough?" were any of the normal questions parents typically ask their college students. After 4 years of building my own life at college, I made what was probably my biggest mistake. I went back home. I guess some part of me hoped things would be different now that I had a degree. They weren't. From the moment I walked through the door with my boxes, my parents acted like I was an unwanted houseguest who had overstayed their welcome. Mom would make these pointed little comments over breakfast about young adults who can't leave the nest, while Dad would casually leave apartment rental listings on the kitchen counter. Emma, now 15 and fully embracing her role as the family princess, was the most direct about it. "Why do you have to stay here?" she complained one morning, glaring at me across the breakfast table. "It's so embarrassing having my old sister living at home. None of my friends' siblings do that." I wanted to point out that most parents actually help their kids during the post-college transition, but what was the point? Instead, I threw myself into job hunting. I must have sent out 100 applications that first month. Finally, I landed a position as a junior project coordinator at a tech company. The salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to start saving for my escape. I worked extra hours, skipped lunch breaks, and saved every penny I could. After 2 months, I had enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a tiny studio apartment. The day I moved out, Mom actually looked relieved. "Don't forget to return your house key," was all she said as I carried out my last box. That little studio apartment might have been small, but it felt like paradise. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was completely mine. No one to make snide comments, no one to compare me to, no one to make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I channeled all my energy into work. Every project, every task, no matter how small, I gave it my all. Need someone to stay late? I volunteered. Difficult client? I'd handle it. Complex problem? I'd solve it. People started to notice. A year and a half after starting, I was called into my supervisor's office. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, but instead, she offered me a promotion to senior project coordinator. The salary bump meant I could finally start putting money aside for my own place. Another year passed, and I got promoted again, this time to project manager. I was actually proud of myself, so I made another mistake. I mentioned it at one of the family dinners I still occasionally attended, trying to maintain some kind of relationship with my parents. Mom and Dad suddenly got very interested, more interested than they'd been in anything about my life in years. "Project manager? That must pay well," Dad said, trying to sound casual. "How much are they giving you?" Before I could deflect the question, Emma jumped in with her usual tact. She looked me up and down, and started laughing. "Whatever it is, you should spend some of it on new clothes. You dress like somebody's grandmother." Mom and Dad joined in the laughter, like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I didn't say a word. I just got up, grabbed my purse, and walked out. They could laugh all they wanted, I had an apartment to save for. The next 3 weeks in the hospital felt like an endless blur of pain, medication, and recovery. 2 surgeries, one to repair internal damage, another to fix my broken leg. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. My hospital room looked like a flower shop. My boss sent a huge arrangement with a note saying my job was secure and to take all the time I needed to recover. My coworkers took turns sending care packages, books, magazines, snacks, anything to help pass the time. Even my old school friends, who I hadn't seen in years, called to check on me. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from relatives and friends. Aunt Sarah called every evening to check my progress. My cousin Mike offered to drive up and help when I got discharged. Even my old college roommate Lisa reached out after seeing a post about my accident on social media. But nothing from my parents. Nothing from Emma. Not a call, not a text, not even a quick "hope you're okay" message. The empty space where their names should have been on my phone screen felt louder than all the other messages combined. Then, a week after my second surgery, they finally showed up. I was dozing in my hospital bed when I heard the door open. For a brief moment, my heart lifted, they'd come after all. Maybe the accident had made them realize. "Sheila." Mom's voice was sharp, cutting through my hopeful thoughts. "Good, you're awake." Dad hung back near the door while Mom marched up to my bedside. "No, how are you feeling?" "No, we were worried. Not even a "you look better." "We need to discuss something important," Mom continued, her tone businesslike. "Emma got her college acceptance letters. Several good schools want her, but we need money for her tuition. We know you've been saving to buy an apartment." It took me a moment to process what she was saying. Surely they hadn't come to my hospital bed, after ignoring me for a week, to ask for. "We expect you to help your sister," Mom said firmly. "Family helps family, and Emma needs this money for her education." I stared at them, the pain medication making everything feel slightly surreal. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to say. "I'm lying here after 2 surgeries, and you haven't even asked how I'm doing." "But you want my savings?" "Don't be dramatic," Mom replied, waving her hand dismissively. "We knew you were getting proper medical care. The hospital kept us informed." "Emma has a real opportunity here," Dad added. "She can't miss this chance. These schools won't wait forever." Something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the pain medication making me braver, or maybe it was just 25 years of built-up resentment finally boiling over. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Mom's eyes widened. I said get out. My voice grew stronger. "For my entire life, you've made it clear that Emma matters more than me. Every birthday, every achievement, every milestone, it was always about her. I worked my way through college while you saved money for her. I built my career from nothing while you praised her every tiny accomplishment. And now?" I gestured at my hospital bed, at the machines monitoring my vital signs. "I almost died in that accident, and you couldn't even be bothered to visit until you wanted something from me." "Now, Sheila," Dad started, finally stepping away from the door. "You're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" I laughed, and it hurt my ribs. "I'm unreasonable for wanting my parents to care that I almost died? I'm unreasonable for wanting to keep the money I earned to pay for my medical bills and buy my own apartment? No, not this time. I'm not giving you a penny of my savings for Emma's college." Mom's face turned an alarming shade of red. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I cut her off. "What exactly have you done for me? Name one thing. One single thing you've done for me that didn't somehow end up being about Emma." The silence that followed was deafening. They stood there, mouths opening and closing like fish out of water, clearly shocked that their reliable doormat of a daughter had finally stood up for herself. "You'll regret this," Mom finally said, her voice cold. She grabbed Dad's arm and pulled him toward the door. They didn't even say goodbye. Just stormed out, letting the door slam behind them. The noise made my head throb, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I'd stood my ground with them. My phone buzzed about an hour later. Then again, and again. I picked it up to find a stream of messages from Emma. "How dare you refuse to help me with college? You're just jealous, because I got into better schools than you ever could. You're so selfish. You don't need an apartment that badly. Mom and Dad are right, you're being completely unreasonable." The messages kept coming, each one more angry than the last. But it was the final message that made my blood run cold. "You know what? I wish you had died in that stupid accident. Then at least your money would have gone to something worthwhile, my education." I stared at the phone screen for a long time, my hands shaking. My baby sister, the miracle child, the one they'd all protected and coddled and spoiled, had just wished me dead. Over money. My finger hovered over the delete button for a moment. Part of me wanted to erase her words, to pretend they'd never existed. But something stopped me. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it to my cloud storage. After 5 weeks of hospital food and uncomfortable beds, coming back to my apartment felt like heaven, even if I needed help from a nurse to get up the stairs. Everything hurt, and the doctors had given me a long list of recovery exercises and physical therapy appointments, but at least I was home. The first thing I did was call my boss, Mark. I'd been worried about work, even though my colleagues had assured me everything was under control. "Sheila," Mark's warm voice came through the speaker. "How are you feeling? Are you settling back in okay?" "I'm home, but everything's still pretty rough," I admitted. "The doctors say I need at least another month before I can think about coming back to work." "I'm sorry about." "Stop right there," he cut me off. "Your health comes first. Just focus on getting better. Your job will be waiting for you when you're ready. I was just starting to feel optimistic when my phone buzzed with a social media notification. My mother had made a post, and I'd been tagged in it. My stomach dropped as I started reading. As a mother, it breaks my heart to see such selfishness from my own daughter. After everything we've done for Sheila, she refuses to help her sister get an education. Emma got accepted to several prestigious colleges, but now she might miss this opportunity because her own sister is too greedy to share her money. How can anyone be so cruel to their own family? Emma's dreams are being crushed because of pure selfishness. The comments started rolling in immediately. I can't believe she would do that to her own sister. Family should always come first. What kind of person denies their sibling an education? She must be heartless. I watched as relatives and family friends, people who'd known me my whole life, piled on, condemning me without knowing the full story. Aunt Linda called me disgraceful. My mother's best friend Susan wrote about how disappointed she was in me. My hands were shaking as I clicked the reply button, but my voice was steady as I typed. Let me add some context to this story. 5 weeks ago, I was in a near-fatal car accident. I had 2 major surgeries. I spent 5 weeks in the hospital. During that time, my parents visited exactly once, not to check on my health, but to demand my savings for Emma's college fund. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't care about my recovery. They just wanted my money. For those wondering why I said no, I need that money for my medical bills and recovery. But even if I didn't, I earned every penny of it myself. I put myself through college without any help from my parents. They were saving for Emma's education then too. And for those who think I'm being cruel to my sister, let me share what she wrote to me while I was still in the hospital. I attached the screenshot of Emma's message. I wish you had died in that stupid accident. Then at least your money would have gone to something worthwhile, my education. So, to all of you judging me, I have a question. Would you give your savings to people who couldn't be bothered to visit you in the hospital? To a sister who wished you had died? To parents who have always made it clear that you matter less than your sibling? The silence that followed felt eternal. Then the new comments started coming in. Oh my God, Sheila, I had no idea. Emma said what? I can't believe they didn't even visit you in the hospital. You're absolutely right to keep your money. Focus on your recovery. Even Aunt Linda and Susan deleted their previous comments and posted apologies. The tide had turned completely, but I felt no satisfaction in it. Just tired. So very, very tired. It's amazing how much can change in 2 months. The physical therapy worked wonders. I'm walking normally now, though my leg still aches a bit when it rains. The scars are healing nicely, and last week I finally returned to work. The car insurance covered the full value of my totaled car, and I used it to buy a newer, safer model. The first time I got behind the wheel after the accident, my hands were shaking, but each drive gets a little easier. The health insurance payout was even better than I expected. I'd taken out a comprehensive policy 2 years ago, thinking it was just the responsible thing to do. Never imagined I'd actually need it, but now I'm thankful for past me's foresight. Between that and the company insurance, all my medical bills are covered, and there's still plenty left over. Yesterday, I signed the preliminary paperwork for my apartment. The down payment is ready to go, and I'm meeting with the bank next week to finalize the mortgage. Aunt Sarah called last week to keep me in the loop, as she put it. My parents had to take out a substantial loan to cover Emma's college tuition. They're not happy about the interest rates, but they didn't have much choice. They'd already promised Emma she could go to her dream school. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, hearing that would have hurt. I would have felt guilty, would have wondered if I should have helped after all. But now I feel nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no anger. Just nothing. I deleted my parents' numbers from my phone. Blocked Emma on all social media. Changed my email address. Some might call it running away, but I see it differently. I'm not running from anything, I'm walking confidently toward the life I built for myself. The movers are coming next month. I've already started packing up my rental apartment, sorting through what to keep and what to donate. Last night, while going through old boxes, I found a photo from my high school graduation. I'm standing alone in my cap and gown, grinning at the camera. My parents aren't in the picture, they were busy with Emma that day. I put the photo in the keep pile. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. That girl in the graduation gown didn't need her parents' support to succeed, and neither does the woman I've become. Sometimes you have to build your own life, your own support system, your own home. And that's exactly what I've done.
This story is titled, I Caught My Fiancé Sending Pics of Our Daughter to Her Ex. Then she started acting defensive when I confronted her, so I asked for a paternity test. Hey everyone! We spend so much time finding you the best stories. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, I need to get this off my chest because I honestly don't know what else to do. My fiancée Sarah and I have been together for 4 years. We have a beautiful little girl, Lily, who's 2 years old. She's my world, my reason for everything. Sarah and I have had our ups and downs like any couple, but I thought we were solid, you know? I mean, we were planning our wedding for next year, and I was ready to spend the rest of my life with her. But something happened a few weeks ago that flipped everything upside down. It's been eating me alive ever since. Let me start with some background. Sarah has an ex from before we got together. She's mentioned him maybe once or twice, but not in a way that ever raised any red flags. She said they had a messy breakup and that it was all in the past. I assumed they weren't in contact anymore, which seemed normal to me. Honestly, I never gave it much thought. Sarah never gave me any reason to doubt her. Until now. A couple of weeks ago, Sarah was in the shower and her phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't even look at it. I'm not the kind of guy to go through her phone or anything like that. We've always had a pretty open relationship when it comes to trust. But this time was different. The notification caught my eye because of the name. Her ex. I won't say his name here, but seeing it pop up on her screen made me freeze. My first thought was, why is he messaging her? I mean, we've been together for years, and as far as I knew, they hadn't talked at all during that time. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It was a picture of Lily. It wasn't anything weird or inappropriate. It was just a cute picture of her smiling at the park, one we had taken during a family day out the week before. But seeing that photo and a message to her ex made my stomach drop. It felt wrong. What really threw me off, though, was the chat history. Or, more accurately, the lack of one. There were no messages before that photo. Nothing. Just the picture of Lily and a single response from him saying, she's beautiful. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. If they were just casually catching up, why would she delete the entire conversation? It didn't make sense. People don't just randomly send a picture of their kid to an ex without some sort of context or lead-up. The whole thing felt off. When Sarah got out of the shower, I decided to confront her about it. I didn't want to come off as accusatory right away, so I tried to stay calm. I showed her the message and asked, why are you sending pictures of Lily to your ex? Her reaction was immediate. She got defensive, like really defensive. She grabbed her phone out of my hand and said, it's not a big deal. We were just catching up. I asked her what they were catching up about and why she felt the need to send him a picture of Lily. She said he had asked how life was going and that he had been curious about Lily because he knew she had a child now. That doesn't explain why you deleted the rest of the conversation, I said. Her face changed when I said that. She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged it off like it wasn't important. I just didn't think you'd understand, she said. That pissed me off. Understand what? I asked. If it's nothing, why are you hiding it? She rolled her eyes and said I was overreacting. That's when the argument started. I told her straight up that it wasn't okay for her to share pictures of our daughter with her ex behind my back. I asked her how she'd feel if I was sending pictures of Lily to one of my exes. She didn't really answer that. Instead, she flipped it around on me. Do you even trust me? She asked. Are you really that insecure? That comment hit me like a punch in the gut. Of course I wanted to trust her. But how was I supposed to trust her when she was hiding things from me? I told her that, and she just kept saying I was blowing things out of proportion. I asked her flat out if there was something going on between her and her ex. She got mad, like really mad. She started yelling, saying that I was being ridiculous and that I was turning a harmless conversation into something it wasn't. But the more defensive she got, the more suspicious I felt. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. Finally, I asked the question that had been eating away at me since I saw the message. Is Lily mine? Her face went pale. She stared at me like I had just slapped her. How can you even ask me that? She said, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't want to ask it, I said, but you're not giving me much of a choice. If there's nothing to hide, then why are you so afraid of being honest with me? She started crying, saying that I was destroying our relationship and that she couldn't believe I would accuse her of something like this. But at that moment, I didn't feel like I could trust her anymore. The night I told her I wanted a paternity test, she cried for hours. I sat on the couch, trying to wrap my head around everything. She eventually came out of the bedroom, her face red and swollen from crying, and asked if we could talk. I said, sure, but I was so emotionally drained that I wasn't sure how much I even wanted to hear. She sat down across from me and started talking about how much she loves me, and how she'd never do anything to hurt me. She kept saying, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you don't trust me. I did trust you, I said, but you're not exactly making it easy right now. You've been hiding things from me. How do you expect me to react? She didn't really answer. Instead, she shifted the focus to Lily. Lily is your daughter, she said. She loves you. How can you even question that? I told her I wasn't questioning how much I love Lily. That's never been the issue. What I'm questioning is Sarah's honesty. You've been lying to me, I said. Maybe not outright, but by hiding things, by deleting messages. That's the same thing as lying. You're the one who's making me question everything. At that point, she got angry again. She stood up, crossed her arms, and said, You're being ridiculous. This isn't about Lily. This is about your insecurities. You're just looking for a reason to pick a fight. That hit a nerve. I told her this wasn't about me being insecure. It was about trust. You've been sending pictures of our daughter to your ex. You've been talking to him behind my back. How is this my fault? She didn't answer. Instead, she started pacing the room, muttering about how she couldn't believe this was happening. I'm going to ask you one more time, I said. Why did you delete the rest of the conversation? Her answer this time was different. She said, I deleted it because I knew you'd react like this. You're always so quick to assume the worst. That made me pause. It wasn't an outright denial of anything, just an excuse for why she'd hidden it. If it was innocent, you wouldn't have had to delete it, I said. If you're telling me the truth, you'd have no reason to hide it. At this point, she started crying again, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel like she was crying because she was hurt. It felt like she was crying because she was cornered. I can't believe you're doing this, she said through her tears. You're going to ruin everything. No, I told her. You're the one who's ruining everything. You're the one who made this mess, not me. After that conversation, things only got worse. Sarah started avoiding me entirely. She'd take Lily and disappear for hours, saying she was going to her mom's house or running errands. When she was home, she barely spoke to me. The tension was unbearable. A few days after that initial argument, I decided to dig a little deeper. I hate to admit it, but I went through her phone again. She had changed her password, which only made me feel more suspicious. I asked her about it, and she said, I need some privacy. You're clearly not respecting boundaries. Privacy? I asked. You're hiding something, and you know it. She didn't respond. That same night, I called her out again. I told her straight up that if there's nothing going on, she needs to prove it. If you have nothing to hide, let me see your phone, I said. She refused. That was the final straw for me. If you can't even be honest with me now, what am I supposed to believe? I asked. She kept saying things like, You're blowing this out of proportion, and I can't believe you're doing this to us. But the more she tried to deflect, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. I told her again that the paternity test was happening, whether she liked it or not. She begged me not to, saying it would tear us apart, but I told her the damage was already done. The next few days were a blur. I was trying to hold it together for Lily's sake, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at her, I felt this mix of love and fear. Love because she's my little girl, and I'd do anything for her. Fear because I didn't know what the test would say. Sarah, on the other hand, was acting like a completely different person. She went from being defensive and angry to suddenly trying to be overly sweet. She'd bring me coffee in the morning, offer to make my favorite meals, and kept saying things like, I just want us to be okay again. But I wasn't buying it. It felt like damage control, not genuine remorse. One night after Lily had gone to bed, Sarah sat down next to me on the couch and said, Can we just move past this? I hate what this is doing to us. I can't move past it until I know the truth, I told her. She sighed and looked down at her hands. What happens if the test comes back and Lily's not yours? She asked. That question hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't even know how to respond. After a long pause, I said, I don't know. I guess we'll cross that bridge if we get there. She started crying again, but I didn't comfort her this time. I just sat there, staring at the floor, wondering how things had gotten to this point. At this point, we're in a holding pattern. I've scheduled the paternity test, and I'm waiting for the appointment. Sarah knows it's happening, but she hasn't brought it up again. We're barely speaking, and the tension in the house is so thick you could cut it with a knife. I'm trying to keep it together for Lily, but it's hard. Every time I look at her, I feel this mix of love and heartbreak. I don't know what I'll do if the test comes back and she's not mine. Anyway, that's where things stand right now. I'll update when I know more. Hey everyone, before we dive into the update, if you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel. Update 1 point. The days leading up to the paternity test were some of the most emotionally draining of my life. The atmosphere at home was unbearable. Sarah and I were like strangers, walking past each other without a word. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes, her face a mix of sadness and anger, but I didn't have the energy to engage. I spent a lot of time with Lily. Every moment with her felt bittersweet, knowing that soon everything could change. We'd play with her favorite toys, watch her favorite shows, or just sit together while she babbled about things only a 2-year-old could understand. She has this way of looking up at me with these big, innocent eyes, like I'm her entire world, and that's what made it so hard. At night, when Lily was asleep, I'd sit on the couch and just think. My mind was a constant storm of what-ifs. What if she wasn't mine? What if everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie? What if Sarah and her ex had been laughing at me behind my back this whole time? Sarah, for her part, kept to herself. She spent a lot of time in the bedroom with the door closed. I could hear her crying sometimes, but I didn't go to her. I felt like she had no right to my comfort after everything she'd done. The day of the test came quicker than I expected. I didn't tell Sarah what time I was going. I didn't want her to come with me. I needed to do this alone. When I got to the clinic, my hands were shaking. I couldn't believe this was my life now. I felt embarrassed just being there, like the staff could somehow tell I was doubting my own child. The nurse was kind, though. She explained the process and reassured me that it wouldn't take long. The test itself was simple. They took a cheek swab from Lily. I had to bring her in, which was heartbreaking, and one from me. Lily thought it was funny, giggling when the swab tickled her cheek. I tried to smile back, but inside I felt like I was dying. After we left the clinic, I took Lily to the park. I needed to clear my head, and she needed to burn off some energy. Watching her run around, laughing and playing, I couldn't help but think, how could she not be mine? She looked so much like me, or at least I thought she did. Now every little feature had me second-guessing. When we got home, Sarah was waiting by the door. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Did you do it? She asked. Yeah, I said, brushing past her. She followed me into the living room, standing there while I got Lily settled with her toys. Finally, she said, I wish you didn't go through with it. I didn't even look at her. Well, I did, I said. Sarah sat down on the couch across from me, silent for a long time. Then she said, What happens if she's not yours? I don't know, I admitted, but we'll deal with that when the time comes. Don't you love her? She asked, her voice breaking. Of course I do, I said, finally looking at her. But this isn't just about Lily. This is about you, Sarah. You've been lying to me. You've been hiding things from me. How am I supposed to move past that? She started crying again, but I didn't have it in me to comfort her. I just got up and left the room. The next few days were torture. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt of anxiety, wondering if it was the clinic with the results. Sarah and I still weren't speaking much, but she started trying to reach out in little ways, making me coffee in the morning, offering to help with stuff around the house, even trying to start casual conversations. I wasn't having it. I didn't want to pretend like everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. One night, a few days after the test, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen. Can we please talk? She asked. I sighed. About what? About us. About what's happening. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Okay, talk. She hesitated, like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she said, I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know that I love you, and I love the life we've built together. I didn't say anything, she continued. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but that doesn't change how much I care about you, and it doesn't change the fact that Lily loves you and needs you. I finally spoke. You keep saying you made a mistake, but you're not owning up to what that mistake is. Was Lily a mistake, Sarah? Was lying to me a mistake? Or was it sending pictures to your ex behind my back? Which one are you sorry for? She started crying again, but I was too angry to care. Stop crying, I said. Crying doesn't fix this. It doesn't make me trust you again. You did this, Sarah. Not me. She didn't say anything after that. She just left the kitchen and went back to the bedroom. A few days later, I finally got the call from the clinic. My heart was pounding as I picked up the phone. The nurse on the other end explained the results, her voice calm and professional. Lily isn't mine. I don't even remember what I said to her. I think I just thanked her and hung up. I sat there on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling like my entire world had just collapsed. For 2 years, I thought I was Lily's dad. I changed her diapers, stayed up with her when she was sick, taught her to say her first words. She's my little girl. But now I find out she's not. I don't know how long I sat there before Sarah came into the room. She must have seen the look on my face because she froze. You got the results, she said. Yeah, I said. She didn't ask what they said. She just started crying again. I'm so sorry, she said over and over. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't mean for this to happen. I looked at her, feeling more anger than I've ever felt in my life. You didn't mean for this to happen? You lied to me for 2 years. You let me think she was mine. How could you do that to me? She tried to explain, but I wasn't listening. I got up, grabbed my keys, and left the house. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. After I walked out of the house that day, I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. I didn't have a destination in mind, just needed to get away. My head was spinning, and my chest felt tight, like I couldn't catch my breath. The words from the clinic kept echoing in my mind. Lily isn't your biological daughter. I ended up parked at some empty lot, just sitting there in my car. I couldn't even cry. I felt completely numb, like the reality of it hadn't hit me yet. It was hard to process the fact that the little girl I'd been calling my daughter, the one I've loved with everything I have, wasn't mine. The worst part? As much as I wanted to hate Sarah, I couldn't stop thinking about Lily. None of this was her fault. She didn't ask to be caught in the middle of this mess. She didn't ask to be lied about or used as a pawn. She's just a kid. My kid. At least in every way that matters except blood. When I finally went back home, it was late. The house was dark except for a small light in the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch, waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen, like she'd been crying the whole time I was gone. As soon as I walked in, she stood up. Where were you? She asked, her voice shaky. Out, I said. Out where? She pressed. Does it matter? I shot back. She flinched at my tone but didn't say anything. I walked past her into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. She followed me, standing in the doorway. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't look at her. Talk about what? About everything, she said. Everything? I repeated, finally turning to face her. You mean about how you lied to me for 2 years? How you let me think Lily was mine when you knew she wasn't? Do you want to talk about how you've been sneaking around, sending pictures of her to the guy who actually is her father? She started crying again, which just made me angrier. Stop crying, I said, my voice cold. Crying doesn't fix this. It doesn't make what you did okay. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said through her tears. I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. Scared I'd leave you? Scared you'd have to face the consequences of your actions? What were you scared of, Sarah? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, like she couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, she said, I was scared of losing you. I thought if I told you the truth, you'd leave me. And I didn't want to lose what we had. I laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You managed to lose me anyway. The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the house for Lily's sake, but I couldn't even look at Sarah. She kept trying to talk to me, but I shut her down every time. There was nothing she could say to make this better. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out what to do about Lily. Legally, I had no rights to her, which broke my heart. I'd been her dad for 2 years, and now I was supposed to just walk away? How do you do that? How do you stop being someone's father just because a piece of paper says you're not? I reached out to a lawyer to see what my options were. He told me it would be complicated, especially since Sarah and I weren't married. If her biological father wanted to step in, there wouldn't be much I could do. The thought of her ex coming into Lily's life made me sick. This guy had been lurking in the background, hiding in plain sight, and now he might get to claim her as his own? I couldn't let that happen. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Sarah and I had another argument. She came into the living room and sat down across from me, looking nervous. We need to figure this out, she said. Figure what out? I asked, not bothering to hide the bitterness in my voice. Lily, she said. What's going to happen with her? She's your daughter. I said. You figure it out. She's our daughter, she said, her voice breaking. No, Sarah, I said, my voice rising. She's your daughter. She's your daughter and his daughter. You made sure of that the moment you decided to lie to me about who her father was. She started crying again, but I wasn't about to back down. You don't get to play the victim here, I said. You did this. You lied to me. You used me. And now you're expecting me to just forgive you and move on like nothing happened? I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want Lily to lose you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. As angry as I was at Sarah, I knew she was right. This wasn't just about me and her. This was about Lily too. And no matter how much I hated Sarah for what she did, I couldn't bring myself to hate Lily. But I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there in silence. I don't know what's going to happen next. My heart feels like it's been ripped in half. I love Lily more than anything, but I don't know if I can keep pretending everything's okay. And as for Sarah, I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive her. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time. Final update, ... Hey Reddit, I know it's been a while since my last update, but I've finally gotten to a place where I can share everything that's happened. A lot of you had questions, and I think it's time I lay it all out. Things have escalated, and to be honest, this will probably be the last time I talk about this. So, let's get into it. After the paternity test confirmed that Lily wasn't mine, everything fell apart even more than it already had. I told Sarah there was no way we could stay together after what she did. She begged and pleaded, but I was done. I told her flat out, you need to leave. At first, she acted like she didn't understand. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, tears streaming down her face. That's not my problem, Sarah, I told her. You've had 2 years to come clean about this. 2 years to be honest. You made your choice and now I'm making mine. She kept trying to guilt trip me, saying things like, this isn't fair to Lily. She needs you. And we've built a life together. Don't throw it away. But at that point, I couldn't even look at her without feeling a mix of anger and disgust. I gave her 2 weeks to figure out her living situation. She ended up moving in with her mom, which I honestly think is the best place for her. Her mom's a nice woman who probably had no idea what Sarah was doing, and I hope she can help Sarah get her life together. Now, on to the part I know a lot of you are curious about. When did she get pregnant? And how did her ex fit into all of this? A few days after I told her to leave, Sarah came to me and said she wanted to clear the air before she moved out. She said she felt like she owed me the truth, which I found ironic considering how long she'd been lying. She admitted that during the first few months of our relationship, she was still seeing her ex on and off. Apparently, she was confused about what she wanted and couldn't decide between me and him. She described it as a phase where she was trying to figure out who was better for her. You were stable, she said. You had your life together. He didn't, but I didn't know if I was ready to give up on him yet. Hearing that made my blood boil. I asked her, so, you were double dating us? Playing both sides to see who came out on top? She nodded, tears running down her face. I know it was wrong. I was selfish, and I wasn't thinking about how it would hurt you. Apparently, she found out she was pregnant about 4 months into our relationship. By then, she had already decided to cut ties with her ex and stay with me. When I asked her why she made that decision, she hesitated before answering. Because you were better for me, she said. He's a deadbeat. He's never had a stable job, and he doesn't take responsibility for anything. I knew I couldn't count on him to be a father. But you're kind, responsible, and financially stable. I knew you'd be a good dad. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you used me? I asked. No, she said quickly. It wasn't like that. I fell in love with you. I thought if I stayed with you, I could make it work. I thought you'd never find out. That last part hit me hard. She didn't stay with me because she loved me. At least, not at first. She stayed because I was the better option. She stayed because I could provide a stable life for her and Lily while her ex couldn't. You made me a second choice, I said. You didn't choose me because you wanted me. You chose me because I was the safer bet. She tried to argue, but I wasn't hearing it. I told her that her decision to stay with me under false pretenses wasn't just selfish. It was cruel. You had 2 years to tell me the truth, I said. 2 years to let me know that Lily wasn't mine. Instead, you let me build my life around a lie. Since she moved out, I've been doing my best to move on. I still see Lily occasionally, but it's not the same. Sarah has been surprisingly cooperative about letting me spend time with her, which I appreciate, but it's bittersweet. Every time I look at Lily, I see the life I thought I had, the life Sarah took away from me. As for her ex, I haven't had any direct contact with him. Sarah claims he still doesn't know that Lily is his, and honestly, I'm torn about what to do. On one hand, I feel like he has a right to know. On the other hand, I don't trust him to be a good father. If Sarah's description of him is accurate, he's not someone I want anywhere near Lily. A lot of people have asked me if I'd consider fighting for custody. The truth is, I don't know if that's even possible. Legally, I have no claim to Lily, and emotionally, I'm not sure if I could handle the constant reminders of what Sarah did. But I love Lily. She'll always have a piece of my heart, even if I'm not her biological dad. So, where do I go from here? Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. Therapy has been a huge help in processing everything, and I'm starting to rebuild my life one step at a time. I've reconnected with some old friends and started focusing on hobbies I'd neglected. It's not much, but it's a start. As for Sarah, I wish her the best, but I don't see any path forward where she's a part of my life. I can't forgive her for what she did, and I don't think I ever will. She didn't just betray me, she betrayed Lily too. She made decisions that will affect all of us for the rest of our lives, and now she has to live with the consequences. Aquafriday. Thank you to everyone who's followed this story and offered support along the way. Writing all of this out has been a strange but cathartic experience. I never thought I'd be one of those people spilling their personal drama on the internet, but here we are. To those who've been in similar situations, stay strong. It's not easy, but you'll get through it. And to everyone else, take care of the people you love. And don't take trust for granted. That's all I've got for now. Thanks for listening, Reddit. This story is titled, "My Wife Cheated with Her Boss, and My Daughters Helped Hide It. So I Took My Nuclear Revenge." Hey everyone! I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. Maybe to vent, maybe to get it out of my system, maybe to make sense of it all, because right now, my life feels like it's been ripped to shreds and I can barely keep it together. I just need to tell someone, even if it's strangers on the internet. For almost 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life most people dream about. I married my wife, Jane, when we were young. She was 20, I was 22. We were broke as hell back then, but we were happy. We built a life together from scratch. Raised 2 daughters, Alice and Maddie. They were everything to me, my pride and joy. Alice, my oldest, is 26. She's always been the overachiever. Valedictorian in high school, graduated top of her class in college, and now she's getting married this fall to her longtime boyfriend. Maddie is 24, my youngest. She's always been the more carefree one. She's sweet, always quick to smile, and she's been really close to me since she was little. I'd always thought I had a great relationship with both of them. Jane and I had a good marriage, or at least that's what I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like every couple. Financial struggles when the kids were young, arguments here and there, health scares. But through it all, we stuck together. I thought we were a team. I really believed we'd grow old together, that we'd be that old couple sitting on the porch, laughing about the crazy days when we were young. I loved her with everything I had. Last week, everything came crashing down. It was just a regular weekday. Jane told me she was going out for dinner with Alice and Maddie. They do this pretty regularly, every couple of weeks. Girls' dinner, they call it. It's their time to catch up, laugh, and share things they don't want to talk about with me. I never minded. In fact, I loved that they were close. It made me proud as a husband and father, like I'd done something right in raising a family that loved each other so much. That night, Jane was getting ready upstairs. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. I remember it so clearly. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't unusual. She gets messages from the girls all the time, especially when they're organizing plans. Without thinking, I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't have any reason to be suspicious, but for some reason, I opened the message. It was from an unsaved number. "Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My first reaction was confusion. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake, or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Finally, I tapped on the thread to see the rest of the conversation. What I found destroyed me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't have to be. They were enough to tell me exactly what was going on. The texts were from her boss. They were meeting for dinner, and it was obvious this wasn't a business dinner. The tone of the messages was flirty, affectionate. There were texts from earlier that week. "I miss you. Once a week isn't enough." Jane had replied, "I miss you too." My stomach turned. My heart started racing. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. This was my wife. The woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. She was having an affair. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was in shock, trying to process what I'd just seen. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely sure. A few minutes later, Jane came downstairs. She was dressed up, looking beautiful as always. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, okay?" Her voice was so casual, so warm, like everything was normal. I don't know how I kept it together, but I managed to say, "Have fun with the girls." As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone and turned on location sharing. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never felt the need to spy on her or anyone else. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat there for a while, staring at my own phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank even further. She wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. She was going somewhere else, a place we'd been to many times as a family. I texted Alice and Maddie, "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Both of them responded almost immediately. Alice said, 7 o'clock, can't wait to see her. Maddie said something similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But at that moment I knew. Jane wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited a little longer, watching Jane's location. She arrived at the restaurant. I grabbed my car keys and drove there, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to find her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining things. Then I drove away. As I sat in my car, staring at the picture of my wife with another man, I felt a wave of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face her, how to confront her. So, I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture. Just the picture, with a simple caption. Period. Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner. Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I didn't want to deal with the fallout yet. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I'd always thought of myself as a good husband, a good father, but now I wasn't so sure. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After I sent that photo in the family group chat and turned off my phone, I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into my brother's driveway. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could tell something was wrong, though. I guess it was written all over my face. I didn't tell him the full story then. I just said I needed a place to crash for the night. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. I kept replaying the moment I saw them together in the restaurant. The way Jane smiled at her boss, the way they leaned in close to each other, holding hands like two teenagers in love. It made me sick. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And then there was Alice and Maddie, the way they lied to me so casually, like it was nothing. I raised them to be honest, to have integrity. Yet, here they were, helping their mother cover up an affair. It felt like a betrayal on a completely different level. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Jane had called me dozens of times. Alice and Maddie had texted me as well. I didn't have the strength to read everything at once, so I skimmed through. Jane's messages were what I expected. Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk. I didn't listen to her voicemails. I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice. I knew it would just make me angrier. Maddie's messages hit differently. She sent me wall after wall of texts, apologizing profusely. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk? I'm so scared I've ruined everything. She even had her boyfriend text me. Hey, this is Josh. Maddie's really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her. I didn't reply to her either. I didn't know what to say. Alice, on the other hand, was a different story. Her text was short and cold. Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake. Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown betrayal, not only by Jane, but by Alice and Maddie too. They lied to me. They helped their mother cover up something that completely shattered our family. I couldn't help but think about all the times they must have lied to my face. Every time I asked about their plans and they told me they were going to dinner, knowing full well what Jane was really doing. Every time they smiled at me, acting like everything was normal, all the while hiding the truth. I spent most of the day stewing in my own anger and heartbreak. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to open up yet. I needed time to sort through my thoughts. By the afternoon, I decided I couldn't let this go without saying something. I started by texting Maddie. I kept it short. Period. Maddie, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space to figure things out. She replied almost instantly. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much. I didn't respond. Then I texted Alice. Period. Alice, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk. She didn't reply, but I know she must have shown Jane because Jane started texting me again shortly after. Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in excuses. Later that evening, I finally told my brother the full story. I showed him the messages, the photo, everything. He was furious on my behalf. You need to cut them all off, he said. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit me hard, because deep down I knew he was right. But cutting off my daughters? That was a step I wasn't sure I could take. That night, I started thinking about the next steps. I knew my marriage to Jane was over. There was no coming back from this. I didn't even want to try. But what about Alice and Maddie? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they did? I decided I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to move forward. But one thing was certain. My life as I knew it was over. The fallout didn't just hit like a bomb. It lingered. A slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. Every emotion I had felt earlier, the rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, had given way to a dull, crushing weight in my chest. It was like the life I had built, the one I thought was rock solid, was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The first thing I noticed when I turned on my phone was the silence. For all the notifications and missed calls earlier in the day, now there was nothing new. No more frantic texts from Maddie, no follow-ups from Alice, no voice messages from Jane. It was like they realized I wasn't going to respond and gave up. Or maybe they were regrouping. Who knows? Either way, the quiet was unsettling. The silence gave me time to think, and that wasn't a good thing. When the anger was gone, all that was left was the hurt. The questions that kept swirling in my head like a tornado. How long had this been going on? How many times had Jane lied to my face? Did Alice and Maddie ever feel guilty about what they were doing? Or was this all just normal for them, betraying their father to protect their mother? I sat down with my brother that night and laid it all out for him. He didn't say much while I was talking, just listened. I told him about finding the texts on Jane's phone, the lies from Alice and Maddie, the picture I took of Jane with her boss at the restaurant, and the family group chat bomb I dropped before disappearing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. That's messed up, he said. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I always thought Jane was a little, too polished, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls? Man, I don't know. It's low. It was a relief to hear someone else say it out loud, to confirm that I wasn't overreacting or losing my mind. But it didn't make it any easier. My brother was furious on my behalf, which helped in the moment. But the truth was, I didn't need his anger. I had plenty of my own. What I needed was clarity, a way forward. I had none. The next morning, I decided to stop wallowing and start doing something. The first step was getting my finances in order. I couldn't think about the emotional side of things if I didn't protect myself first. I spent most of the day canceling joint accounts, moving money into a separate account Jane couldn't touch, and locking down anything that might be at risk during the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief as an opportunity to blindside me. But it wasn't just about Jane. As I went through my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about all the money I had spent, or was planning to spend, on Alice's wedding. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. All for a daughter who had looked me in the eye and lied, who had helped her mother betray me. The thought made me sick. I made a mental note to talk to my lawyer about it. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I sure as hell wasn't going to pay another cent. By the afternoon, I was ready to take the next step. I called a lawyer. Well, several lawyers, actually. My brother had recommended I meet with a few before choosing one, so I spent the rest of the day sitting in offices, retelling the story to strangers who were trying very hard to act professional while clearly judging the situation. By the end of the day, I had picked someone. She was tough, smart, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted this to be as clean and quick as possible, but I also wanted to make sure Jane didn't walk away with anything she didn't deserve. The lawyer reassured me, saying she'd handled plenty of cases like this before. That didn't make me feel any better, but at least I felt like I was in good hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started to think about what I wanted to say to Jane. I hadn't confronted her yet. I'd been avoiding it, partly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and partly because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of explaining herself. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. At some point, I'd have to face her, and when I did, I wanted to be ready. I didn't want to get sucked into her excuses or her tears. I needed to stay focused, to remind myself why I was doing this. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, every question I wanted to ask, every point I wanted to make. I didn't know if I'd actually use it, but writing it down helped. It made me feel like I had some control, like I wasn't just a victim in all of this. The hardest part, though, was thinking about Alice and Maddie. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I didn't know if I could. How do you talk to your daughters after finding out they've been lying to you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild that trust? I wanted to believe that Maddie's apologies were sincere, that she was truly sorry for what she'd done. But how could I trust that? How could I trust anything she said after what I'd discovered? And Alice, her cold, dismissive response had shattered me. I always knew she was closer to Jane, but I never thought she'd side with her mother in something like this. It felt like she'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix this, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after them, begging for their forgiveness or their explanations. They made their choices, and now they'd have to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since discovering the affair, I didn't feel completely lost. I had a plan. It wasn't much, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of sitting in my brother's guest room, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I decided it was time to face Jane. Avoiding her wasn't going to change anything, and I had things I needed to say, things she needed to hear. I texted her late that night. "We need to talk. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house." She responded almost immediately. "I'll be there. Please just let me explain." Explain? What was there to explain? I wasn't interested in excuses or half-hearted justifications, but I didn't reply. I figured I'd save it for when we were face to face. The next morning, I got up early and drove to our house. As soon as I walked through the door, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia and bitterness. This was our home, the place where we'd built a life, raised our kids, celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Now it felt hollow, like everything good that had happened here was tainted. Jane showed up right on time. She walked in nervously, her eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying for days. She was holding her phone in one hand like it was a shield, and I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail stung more than it should have. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, standing just inside the door like she was afraid to come any closer. "Don't thank me," I said. My voice came out colder than I expected. "I'm not here to make things easier for you." That set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared countless family dinners. She started talking right away, saying all the things I'd expected her to say. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She kept repeating herself, cycling through the same tired lines, like if she said them enough, they'd start to sound believable. "Stop," I said finally, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear excuses, I want answers." She looked at me confused. "What do you mean? How long?" I asked. She hesitated. "A few months. Try again." Her face crumpled and she whispered, "Almost a year." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my anger in check. A year. An entire year of lies. How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back? "And the girls?" I asked. "How long have they known?" Jane winced, her eyes darting away. "Not the whole time. I told them a couple of months ago. I didn't mean to drag them into it, but you did," I interrupted. "You made them part of your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" She started crying then, full on sobbing. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, but I was so unhappy and… Unhappy? I snapped. My voice echoed in the empty house. You were unhappy, so you decided to blow up our family? You were unhappy, so you cheated on me and dragged our daughters into your mess? Do you have any idea what you've done, Jane? She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying into her hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. You've ruined everything, I said quietly. Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Alice and Maddie. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How am I supposed to look at them and not see this betrayal? I didn't want them to lie to you, she whispered. I didn't want any of this. Then why did you do it? I asked. Why didn't you come to me if you were so unhappy? Why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around behind my back? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but it didn't matter. Whatever she said wouldn't change what she'd done. After a long silence, I stood up. I'm filing for divorce, I said. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Please don't do this, she begged, standing up too. We can work through this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, I said. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Before I walked out, I turned to her one last time. By the way, don't expect me to pay for Alice's wedding anymore. She can ask her boss to foot the bill, since you're both so good at keeping secrets. Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. On my way out of the house, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. There we were, me, Jane, Alice, and Maddie, smiling like the perfect family. I used to love those photos. Now they felt like a cruel joke. I grabbed the nearest one, a picture of us at Alice's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it didn't last. As I walked to my car, I realized something. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Jane was over, but the real battle was only starting. I still had to deal with Alice and Maddie. I still had to figure out how to move forward. And I still had to face the fact that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent nearly 30 years building, was gone. The confrontation with Jane was just the first step. It cleared the air, sure, but it didn't make things easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel heavier, more real. The anger I felt toward Jane was sharp, but it was focused. I knew what she'd done and why I was walking away. The situation with Alice and Maddie was murkier. They were my daughters, my flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Jane I was filing for divorce, I decided to meet with Alice and Maddie separately. I couldn't ignore them forever, and I wasn't ready to cut them off completely without at least hearing their side. But I also knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. I started with Maddie. She had always been the more emotional one, and her texts over the past few days had been borderline frantic. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she kept fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she started crying. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you lie to me?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't like that. She told me about it a couple of months ago. I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she'd end it soon, that it was just a phase. I didn't know what to do." I stared at her, trying to process her words. "So, you decided to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" "I thought she was going to stop," Maddie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to blow up the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far." "That's not good enough, Maddie," I said. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, covering her face with her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I couldn't let it soften me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the damage they'd all done to my trust. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said finally, "but I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to." Maddie nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do." I didn't have an answer for her. I told her I needed time, and left. My meeting with Alice was a completely different story. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking it would be better to talk in a neutral space. She showed up 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. Thanks for meeting me, she said as she sat down. I didn't waste any time. Alice, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair? She sighed, leaning back in her chair. Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it. Stay out of it? I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't stay out of it, Alice. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side. I wasn't choosing sides, she said defensively. I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who? I asked. For me? Or for your mother? She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. Alice, you're an adult, I said. You're getting married soon. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth? That's different, she said, looking annoyed. Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. A mistake? Is that what you think this is? It is a mistake, she said firmly. People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn everything to the ground because of one bad choice. One bad choice, I repeated, shaking my head. Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't a bad choice. It was a betrayal. By your mother. By you. By Maddie. And you're sitting here acting like I'm overreacting. I'm not saying that, she said quickly. I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that, but you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family. Family doesn't lie to each other, I said. Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maddie didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that. She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. So what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. I can't pretend like you didn't betray me. We sat in silence for a few minutes before I finally stood up. I've said what I needed to say, I told her. The rest is up to you. She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, thinking about both conversations. Maddie seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Alice, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done made it clear that she didn't think she was in the wrong. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make, but the thought of trying to rebuild a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I finalized my decision. I called my lawyer the next morning and told her to revise my will. Alice and Maddie were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement fund, the house, would go to my sister and her kids. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me like my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't even try to talk me out of it. You're doing the right thing, he said. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. The fallout was immediate. Maddie called me the next day, crying hysterically. Dad, please don't do this, she said. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you. Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I stood my ground. Maddie, I'll always love you, I said. But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship, but right now, I can't have you in my life. She kept crying, but eventually she hung up. Alice, predictably, took a different approach. She sent me a long email accusing me of being petty and vindictive. She said I was punishing her for trying to keep the peace and that I was ruining her wedding over something that had nothing to do with her. I didn't respond. There was no point. Jane tried to intervene too. She sent me an email, her tone polished, carefully constructed. She begged me not to cut the girls out of my will, claiming it wasn't fair to punish them for mistakes she had made. She even had the audacity to suggest that removing them would irreparably damage the family. I didn't reply to her either. As the days went on, I started to feel lighter. The anger was still there, but the weight of the betrayal didn't feel as suffocating anymore. Cutting ties wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, not just financially, but emotionally. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I cut them out of my will. I haven't spoken to Alice or Maddie since. I've heard from mutual friends that Alice is scrambling to find the money to cover the wedding expenses I had been paying for. I don't feel sorry for her. She made her choice when she chose to side with her mother. Maddie, I still think about. Part of me hopes that someday we can reconcile, but only if she truly understands the depth of her betrayal. Until then, I'm focusing on myself. Jane? She's nothing to me now. I don't care what she does or who she does it with. The divorce is moving forward, and my lawyer assures me that she won't get much. That's enough for me. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, cutting them all out of my life. But then I remind myself of one simple truth. They made their choices. Now I'm making mine. I'm finally free.
I was 12 when my world turned upside down. That morning started like any other. Dad kissed me goodbye before heading to work at the construction company where he was a site manager. Mom barely looked up from her phone as he left. I remember thinking how strange it was that they used to be so different with each other. My name is Melanie Carter, and that was the last time I saw my father alive. He collapsed at work that afternoon, a massive heart attack, they said. I was in math class when the principal called me to her office. Mom was already there, her mascara perfectly intact despite the news she'd just received. "Your father's gone, Melanie," she said, her voice steady. Too steady. I broke down crying, but Mom just sat there, patting my back mechanically. That evening, I overheard her on the phone with her friend Linda. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Mom's voice carried through the thin walls of our suburban home. "Actually, Linda, this might be for the best," she said, her voice low but clear. "Being a widow is much more respectable than being divorced. Plus, I get to keep everything without the hassle of lawyers." She laughed, actually laughed. I know. I'll play the grieving widow at the funeral. I've already picked out the perfect black dress." I sat on the stairs, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from screaming. Dad's sister, Aunt Sarah, was the only one who seemed to see through Mom's act at the funeral. While everyone else was offering condolences to my devastated mother, Aunt Sarah just stood there, shaking her head sadly. She knew. She'd always known how Mom treated Dad. It didn't take Mom long to heal from her loss. Within 3 months, she started having a man over for dinner. His name was Richard Thompson, and he had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Brandon, who was 11, and Emma, who was 10. Mom would cook elaborate meals when they visited, something she'd never done for Dad. "Melanie, honey," Mom said one evening, her voice syrupy sweet. "Richard and I have something to tell you." I knew what was coming. The way they sat together on the couch, holding hands, Mom beaming like a teenager, it was obvious. "We're getting married," Mom announced. "Isn't it wonderful? You'll have a new father and siblings." I forced a smile, but inside, my stomach was turning. "That's great, Mom. Congratulations." Richard smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Brandon and Emma are so excited to have a new sister," he said, but I'd seen how his kids looked at me during their visits, like I was something stuck to the bottom of their expensive sneakers. That night, I called Aunt Sarah and cried for hours. She listened patiently, then said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes, sweetie, the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Remember that." Brandon and Emma moved in the week after the honeymoon. They immediately claimed the best rooms in the house, including my playroom, which became Emma's art studio. When I tried to protest, Mom just said, "Don't be selfish, Melanie. We need to make them feel welcome." Mom transformed into a completely different person after marrying Richard. She'd spend hours helping Emma with her homework or watching Brandon's soccer practice, while I ate dinner alone in my room. The way she looked at Richard, it was like he hung the moon and stars just for her. I'd never seen her look at Dad that way. "Brandon needs new cleats for soccer," she'd say, or "Emma's taking art classes this summer." There was always money for what they needed. Meanwhile, I learned to stop asking for anything. Even basic things like new school supplies came with size and eye rolls, as if I was being unreasonable for needing pencils. They started taking trips together, nothing fancy, just weekend getaways to nearby cities or camping trips to state parks. But I was never invited. "You'll just be bored," Mom would say, not even looking at me as she packed snacks for Brandon and Emma. "Besides, someone needs to feed the cat." I'd end up at Aunt Sarah's house during these trips. Her small cottage became more of a home to me than our house ever was. She never had kids of her own, but she treated me like the daughter she never had. "This isn't right, Melanie," she'd say, watching me unpack my overnight bag for what felt like the 100th time. "A mother shouldn't play favorites like this." I shrugged, trying to act like it didn't hurt. "At least I have you, Aunt Sarah." One evening, when I was 16, I decided to bring up college during dinner. I'd been researching schools, dreaming about studying business management. "Mom," I said, carefully choosing my moment when everyone was in a good mood. I wanted to talk about college applications. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. "College? Melanie, we can't afford to send you to college. We need to think about Brandon and Emma's education." Brandon smirked across the table, and Emma didn't even try to hide her satisfied grin. Richard just kept eating, as if the conversation didn't concern him at all. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen. "What about Dad's money?" I asked. "He had life insurance, and he'd been saving for years." Mom's face hardened. "I've spent that money taking care of you for the past 4 years," she snapped. "Food, clothes, shelter, did you think all that was free? Stop being so arrogant, Melanie. You can't just demand things from me." I stood there, stunned by her cold tone and the obvious lie in her words. Dad had worked hard to save for my future, and now it was all gone, spent on her new perfect family while I watched from the sidelines. The next weekend, I went to Aunt Sarah's house, with tears still burning in my eyes. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, as I told her everything about Mom's cruel dismissal of my college dreams. Aunt Sarah listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. When I finished, she got up without a word and disappeared into her study. I heard drawers opening and closing, then she returned with a thick envelope. "Your father came to see me about 2 weeks before he died," she said, sliding the envelope across the table. "It was strange, he seemed worried, almost like he knew something was going to happen. He gave me this and made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready for college." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank statement showing a substantial savings account in my name, with Aunt Sarah as the trustee. Dad had been secretly putting money aside for years. "He said your mother had been acting different," Aunt Sarah explained, her voice soft. "He wanted to make sure your future was secure, no matter what happened. The money's been gathering interest all these years." I burst into tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude and love for my father, who'd protected me even after he was gone. "We can't tell Mom about this," I said, wiping my eyes. Aunt Sarah nodded in agreement. Over the next 2 years, I focused on my studies while keeping quiet about my college plans. Brandon and Emma took every opportunity to remind me of my supposed future. "Hey, Melanie," Brandon would smear in the hallway, "I heard the diner downtown needs a dishwasher. Better get your application in early." Emma would join in, "Maybe if you're lucky, they'll let you bus tables too." They'd laugh like it was the funniest joke in the world. I just walked past them, my silence driving them crazy. Then came graduation day. I'd barely taken off my cap and gown when Mom and Richard called me into the living room for a serious discussion. They sat on the couch like judges about to pass sentence, while I stood before them. "Melanie," Richard began, his voice stern, "you're 18 now. We've been generous, but you need to understand that you can't live here forever. You need to find a job and start earning your own living." I smiled calmly. "I understand completely. I'll be moved out by next week." They exchanged surprised looks. Clearly, they'd expected resistance or tears. Mom opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then closed it again. "Well, good," Richard finally managed. "That's very mature of you." Neither of them asked where I planned to go or how I would support myself. They were too relieved that I'd agreed so easily to risk asking questions that might complicate things. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. It was surprising how little I'd accumulated over the years, almost like I'd been subconsciously preparing for this moment all along. Aunt Sarah pulled up in her blue Honda at exactly 9 in the morning. I watched through my bedroom window as she parked, half expecting Mom or someone else to come see what was happening. But the house remained silent, even though I could see movement behind the curtains of Emma's room. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared completely. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt lighter with each mile we put between us and that house of carefully crafted pretenses. I spent that summer working at the Sunshine Cafe, serving coffee and sandwiches to regulars who always tipped well and treated me like family. The owner, Mrs. Peterson, even let me pick up extra shifts when I wanted to save more for college expenses. September came, and I boarded a plane to start my new life at Marshall State University, 3 states away from everything I'd known. The business management program was challenging, but I threw myself into it completely. My roommate, Jessica, became my first real friend since middle school. She didn't know my whole story at first, but when she did learn about it, she just hugged me and said, "Their loss, girl, their loss." Mom's Facebook page became my window into the life I'd left behind. There they were, the perfect family, smiling at Brandon's soccer tournaments, celebrating Emma's art show victories, taking vacation selfies at the beach. The captions always read like marketing copy, "So proud of our amazing kids," or "Nothing better than family time." I was never mentioned, not even once. It was like I'd never existed. Holidays were spent at Aunt Sarah's, cooking together and watching old movies. We created our own traditions, and they meant more to me than any forced family dinner ever had. Sometimes she'd catch me looking at Mom's social media posts and gently take my phone away. "Don't torture yourself," she'd say. "You're making your own story now." And I was. I graduated summa cum laude, with job offers already lined up thanks to my internships and academic performance. Jessica's father, Mr. Reynolds, ran a major marketing firm, and he'd noticed my work during a class project showcase. "We need sharp minds like yours," he said during my interview. "Your professors speak very highly of you." I started in the junior analyst position, but I wasn't content to stay there. I worked late, took on extra projects, and studied market trends in my free time. Within 5 years, I'd been promoted twice and had enough savings for a down payment on my own apartment. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I stood in my empty living room, keys in hand, and finally let myself cry. They were happy tears, tears of pride, of accomplishment, of knowing that I'd made it on my own terms. Then came the biggest surprise. Mr. Reynolds called me into his office one morning, about 7 years after I'd started at the company. "We're creating a new position," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Senior Director of Strategic Development. The board and I agree you're the right person for the job." I opened the folder and nearly gasped at the salary figure. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, especially at my age. I never saw the point in broadcasting my life online. Sure, I had social media accounts, but I mostly used them to share occasional photos of sunsets or coffee shops. Aunt Sarah was the only one who knew about my promotions, my new apartment, or the sleek black Mercedes I'd bought myself as a reward for landing the director position. "You've earned every bit of it," she'd say proudly whenever I shared my achievements with her. Meanwhile, Brandon and Emma's social media feeds were like endless highlight reels of mediocrity. Brandon would pose next to his used Hyundai Elantra with captions like "Living the Dream," "Blessed," "Luxury Life," while Emma shared photos of herself at the local mall, tagging designer brands she clearly couldn't afford. One post particularly made me laugh, Brandon standing next to his car at some local car show, writing, "When hard work pays off. Success, entrepreneur." I was reading this while sitting in my Mercedes AMG, worth more than his annual salary, but I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Then came the message that changed everything. It popped up on my Facebook one Tuesday morning. "Melanie, it's your mother. My 55th birthday is coming up next month, and I'm having a celebration at an expensive restaurant, Le Blanc. You've probably never heard of it. I expect you to attend. It's on the 15th, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't embarrass me." I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times. 12 years of silence, and this was how she reached out? No, how are you? No attempt to bridge the gap. Just a command to appear at her party, with that subtle dig about the restaurant's price point. I almost deleted the message right there. But something stopped me, curiosity, maybe, or the desire to see what would happen. I called Mr. Reynolds and requested a week off, then booked a flight to my hometown. That evening, over tea in her cozy kitchen, Aunt Sarah asked the question I'd been pondering myself: what are you planning to give her? I smiled, pulling out my phone to show her the confirmation email. A luxury vacation package to the Maldives. 2 weeks at a 5-star resort, first-class flights included. Worth about $15,000. Aunt Sarah's eyes widened. Melanie, that's too much. She doesn't deserve it. Oh, I know she doesn't, I laughed, taking a sip of tea. But can you imagine her face when she realizes what she's been missing all these years? The daughter she threw away turned out to be more successful than she could have imagined. I want to see her reaction when she realizes just how wrong she was about me. You're a little bit evil, Aunt Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. I love it. The evening of Mom's birthday, I slipped on my Chanel dress, elegant in its simplicity, with a price tag that could have bought 10 of the flashy outfits I spotted later that night. I deliberately took a taxi to the restaurant, amused by how this would play into their assumptions about my life. Le Blanc turned out to be exactly what I expected, the kind of place that impressed people who'd never eaten at a truly high-end restaurant. The kind of place that served frozen seafood but put gold leaf on the desserts. I'd had business dinners at places that made this look like a diner. The hostess led me to a private room where the party was already in full swing. Mom sat at the head of the table, wearing a sequin dress that sparkled under the chandelier. Richard was beside her, and Brandon and Emma flanked them like royal heirs. The rest of the seats were filled with relatives I hadn't seen in over a decade: Aunt Linda, who used to pinch my cheeks too hard, Cousin Rachel, who always bragged about her kids, and various other faces from my past. Mom's eyes barely flickered over me before her lip curled slightly. Oh, Melanie, you came. You could have dressed up a bit more for the occasion. I took my seat at the far end of the table, watching the show unfold. Aunt Linda gave Mom a scented candle set. It's from that nice shop at the mall, she explained proudly. Mom cooed over it like it was diamonds. Cousin Rachel presented a gift card to a local spa. For a day of pampering, she announced. More excited squeals from Mom. The gifts continued: a cookbook, a decorative vase, a basket of bath products. Mom treated each one like a precious treasure, making sure to emphasize how thoughtful and perfect each gift was. Then came Brandon and Emma's moment. They stood up together, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Mom, Brandon said, and it still felt wrong hearing him call her that, Emma and I pulled our money to get you something special. Emma pulled out her phone and showed a photo. It's a 65-inch smart TV. We already had it delivered and mounted in your living room. Mom burst into tears, pulling them both into a tight hug. My wonderful, generous children. I can't believe you did this. You must have saved for months. Finally, all eyes turned to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. Mom's expression darkened immediately. What's this supposed to be? Open it and see, I suggested quietly. But she didn't. Instead, her face turned red with anger. This is exactly what I expected from you, she spat. You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only nice thing you own. You take a taxi because you can't afford a car. And now you give me this tiny box? What could possibly be in here that's worth giving? A gift card to McDonald's? She threw the box back at me. It skidded across the table, leaving a scratch in the cheap veneer. Brandon and Emma snickered behind their hands. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. Richard just kept eating his dessert as if nothing was happening. I picked up the box calmly, brushing off the tablecloth crumbs that had stuck to its elegant wrapping. The room had gone quiet, waiting to see what I would do next. You know what's funny, Mom? I said, my voice steady. In this little box is a receipt for a 2-week luxury vacation to the Maldives. First-class flights, 5-star resort, everything included. Worth $15,000. The color drained from her face. Emma dropped her fork with a clatter. That's impossible, Mom stammered. You couldn't afford something like that. You're obviously lying. I couldn't help but laugh. You'd know whether I could afford it or not if you'd shown any interest in my life these past 12 years. But let me catch you up, I'm a senior director at Reynolds Marketing Group. I own my apartment in the city. And that taxi you mocked? I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood. Brandon's mouth hung open. Emma had stopped giggling. But since you're so convinced I'm a loser, I continued, tucking the box back into my purse, and you clearly don't want anything from me, I won't spoil your birthday any further. Enjoy your TV, I hear the resolution is almost as good as the one in my home theater. I walked out with my head high, the click of my heels echoing in the sudden silence. The maitre d' called a taxi, and I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. She was waiting up for me, 2 cups of tea already steaming on the coffee table. I told her everything that had happened. Some people never change, she sighed, shaking her head. Your mother's always been more interested in appearances than reality. We were still talking when my phone started ringing. An unknown number, but I knew who it was. Melanie, sweetheart. Mom's voice dripped with honey, I do not know where she got my number. I've been thinking about what happened. Have you? I replied coolly. Yes, and I realize now that I may have been hasty. If you're still willing to give me that gift, I'd love to accept it. We could use this as a fresh start. I want to be part of your life again. We're family. No, I said, finally understanding something. We're not family. We're just people who share DNA. And you didn't want to restore our relationship, you just want that vacation package. I hung up. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing after I left town. Mom called from different numbers, her cell, the house phone, even Richard's phone. When she realized I wouldn't pick up, the messages started flooding in. Melanie, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I've been thinking about what you said about your job. Maybe you could help Brandon get started in marketing? He's very creative. Emma's been saying she'd love to intern at a big company like yours. It would look so good on her college applications. The house needs some repairs, and since you're doing so well. Each message was more transparent than the last. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just an endless stream of requests and hints about my money. It was like watching a desperate gambler trying to win back losses, except what Mom had lost wasn't money, it was her relationship with her daughter. I read each message with a strange detachment, like I was studying a case study for work. The tactics were almost impressive in their variety: guilt, I'm your mother, how can you ignore me? Flattery, you've become such a successful woman, manipulation, family should help family, and even threats, I'll tell everyone how you abandoned your mother. Your mother's been calling me nonstop, Aunt Sarah told me over the phone a week after I'd returned home. She showed up at my house today, if you can believe it. Demanded I give her your address. What did you tell her? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I told her to get off my property before I called the police, Aunt Sarah chuckled. You should have seen her face. She kept saying she had a right to know where her daughter lives. I reminded her that she gave up that right years ago. I could picture Mom standing on Aunt Sarah's porch, probably wearing one of her expensive outfits, trying to bully her way into getting what she wanted. It was the same pattern I'd watched my whole life, but now I could see it clearly for what it was. She didn't take it well, Aunt Sarah continued. Started ranting about how ungrateful we both were, how she'd sacrificed everything for you. The neighbors probably heard everything. When she finally realized I wasn't going to give in, she stormed off to her car. But Melanie, be careful. She seemed desperate. I already blocked her on everything, I assured Aunt Sarah. Social media, phone, email, everything. And security at my office knows not to let her in if she shows up. After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, looking at everything I'd built for myself. The modern furniture I'd chosen, the art on the walls, the view of the city from my windows, all of it earned through my own hard work. I thought about Mom's messages, about her sudden interest in my life now that she knew I had money. In the end, it was almost funny. She'd thrown away a relationship with her daughter for the appearance of a perfect family, and now she was desperate to get back into my life for the appearance of success. But she'd taught me one valuable lesson: family isn't about legal documents. It's about love, support, and being there for each other through good times and bad. I had that with Aunt Sarah. The next morning, I called the travel agency and changed the name on the Maldives vacation package to Sarah Carter. When I told my aunt, she tried to refuse, but I insisted. "You deserve this more than she ever did," I said. "You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was." Aunt Sarah hugged me tight, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.